Hi, everyone. This is Professor Tennyson Mukuchini here. Welcome to part two of the session on grantsmanship. Just for the record, you will remember that we had the first part that was yesterday, and just a quick run through some of the content or the highlights from yesterday. I spoke at some level about the do's and the don'ts when it comes to grant writing. I spoke also about how the development of a proposal, what a grant proposal looks like in terms of how it differs from the traditional proposal. I also highlighted this issue about the fact that when you write for grants, you must never forget that you are writing to convince people at the other end to give you money. And the things that they evaluate are literally to do with whether the problem that you promise you are proposing to look at is a problem that they can be assured or convinced of as being a necessary problem to address. You also have to show that the problem you've identified aligns with the priorities that are set out by the agency that have put out the grant. You have to assure them that you have appropriate methods for getting to where you need to get to. You have to assure them that you as an individual are the appropriate individual for them to trust their funds with. And then, of course, you have to have clarity in terms of the methodology. I spoke at length about how you should ensure you have detail, explicit detail of all the activities you want to do and justification thereof of those activities. And that really related to what the content expectations are. I then walked you through key elements of what one would expect to see in the title of a grant application, what one would expect to see in terms of the abstract, what one would expect to see in terms of the literature review, the background, in terms of the methodology. And there was also an identification and an acknowledgement of the fact that with the proposal, you are offering prospective possibilities about, you are offering prospective possibilities about the the results that people should expect to see. Uh, the the results that people should expect to see. Remember, a proposal does not include, it does not include the actual, it does not include the actual res results, but it gives an indication of what results people would expect to see when you've completed your work. So we've spoken entirely about the content, but we need to also then attend to the process that one follows in readiness for submission to a grant awarding body. So the next section that we talk to now is that bit that relates to the process that one follows. We also have to make sure of some do's and don'ts in relation to the process. So the part two looks at that. I advise that those who did not watch part one stay on point and actually refer back to part one so that they can make sense of the content that I will present tonight. Now, just the usual administrative arrangements. I will now be turning off the video so that we can proceed with the second part. Then, just as a quick other additional consideration, do remember that you have the chat function to submit your questions to me, and I will look at those. We are also heading towards the latter part of this program, so We are going to start now doing sessions where we ask for individuals to submit areas that they found problematic. We're going to ask for individuals to submit specific things that they would like us to look at. I already have a specific request where people who are writing up their chapters would like us to have sessions where we look at the specific detail of certain chapters so that they can see how to format their chapters. So we know that our upcoming sessions will include elements of that, but we're also going to have an event or a setting where we will kind of get requests, as it were, of things that you would like to have done again, things you would like to have done in greater detail. So just pay attention to that. And remember also that I have said, and I will confirm this once we're clear, we have currently identified nearly 30 professors who are going to be working on reviewing your work when you submit it. There are contractual issues we have to finalize, and it's generally not advisable for us to take your work in until we finalize contracts. So we're kind of just waiting for that to happen. But those are side issues. Now, to the matter at hand, part 2 of this grant writing session that we have. Part really focuses on what we call the space in which you move from theory to practices. Basically turning all those ideas that we gave you, all those ideas that we shared with you around what the content should look like, and turning those into the practice and the practices that you would engage in when you're writing out your or applying for a grant. So remember, with grants, the driving unit of a grant application is the proposal. But around the proposal, there are things like the information you collate about yourself, the information you put in about the institution that will support you, some information about the people who will be central to assisting you to complete this grant that you've said you're applying for. So, and also, folks, I don't know, yesterday I suggested that people go to a particular site, grants.gov, to get a sense of what is available in terms of the grants. If any of you have done that, I would really appreciate it. You can just put a comment in the chat box about whether you've found your experience of accessing that. Were there lots of grant opportunities? Were there not enough? Were you able to get through? But in any case, so the practice of turning all this theory that I've shared with you into real tips, real practice-ready guidance, centers around the top tips of what you should do, centers around how you should deal with particular elements of the grant writing process, and also talks about what the reviewers look for when they look at grants, because it is important to work out what it is that is being used to judge your work. Because once you clarify that, then you know how to spread out your emphasis so that you cover the necessary areas. Now, the USA, America, as we all know it, is the biggest grant awarding body on this earth. They give more grants than anybody else, and their grants are, interestingly, not as discriminatory as one would expect. So they have grants that are specifically set up for African students. They have grants from African students from particular countries. They have grants for very specific demographic groups, all those things. They have all that. And there's a foundation that centrally looks at these grants is the Foundation Center. This Foundation Center basically is the place where all these rich people who die, or companies that set up foundations to give grants, they all refer to the Foundation Center as their central organizing body. So they've carried out a study, and in that study, they came out with some basic, what they call the 5 top tips to successful grantmanship, and it's the tips that people follow to make sure that they get ahead in this grant writing journey. So I want to share some of those for you. Firstly, the first thing that they say, and this is easy to say but much harder to do. So folks, every grant that you see, every grant or call for proposals or call for money, they all have information about the opportunity. And what you are meant to do is to get that information and say, look, the grant is being offered by, say in one instance is the NRF, which is a popular source of grants for South Africa. Your job is to then go to the NRF website, read about the NRF, read about who they are, what their preferences are, check if you can find any other previously submitted applications that were successful and were awarded money. You read all those things so you can get a sense about what type of funding body the NRF is. You do that so you can get a sense of what they prioritize, how they move, that type of thing. But that's the first homework. Of course, in that research thing, there's an expectation that if you have a topic that you want to be the central topic of your grant application, you also have to read up on it, research it, get a sense of the clear problems, get a sense of who the contributors in that space are, all those things. So first tip, do your homework, research. Second tip is that we expect you to present a logical solution to a problem. So remember, the basis of all research, the basis of even grantman proposal writing is that you have to demonstrate that you indeed have a problem that is worthy of research, and its magnitude justifies it, the nature of the problem, how topical it is, the fact that we don't understand enough about it, all those things justify whatever you choose as the problem. So when you seek a way of understanding this, we're expecting that you want to look for a logical process. And I know that seems obvious, but what sometimes happens is people are aware that the call for money that they are applying to says 5 million rand. And they then decide that, for them to get a proposal that could swallow up that 5 million rand, they must throw in all sorts of interventions and data collection approaches, when in actual fact, a single method would have been enough. So the issue is go for logic over anything else, even if the logic turns out to be substantially cheaper than what you think is on hand or is on offer. So your issue is not about making sure that you quench or you take away as much of what is offered. Your issue is about creating a realistic budget to what you believe the problem deserves and would warrant from what you know. They also say, think of your proposal as a story. The reason that they say this is, remember, your proposals and grant applications are generally read by people who have money or who are in charge of the money, but they're not necessarily experts in the field of whatever you've submitted. So if you want your story to have traction, it has to be presented as a story that has a beginning, and that beginning is how you present the problem. You highlight the opportunity that is there, and you give us a statement of the need of what needs to be looked at. Then that same story is a middle point, and that's when you present the methodologies that you suggest would be necessary to understand this problem or get to the bottom of this problem. Then finally, the end are the results and the outcomes of your study. So essentially, when you write up this work, you want to write it in such a way that even people who are not experts in your field can definitely see the progressive and logical progression of. Next tip is that you convince the funder you know what you're doing. And that has to do with a range of things. First, clarity in terms of how you conceptualize the problem. Secondly, clarity in terms of the methods that you are proposing to get to the bottom of what it is you're understanding. Also, clarity in terms of knowing that you may choose to go left, but there are other alternatives that are on offer and you didn't choose them because of this, because of that. Then, of course, apart from you showing that you understand what you're doing, and sometimes the way people convince the funder that they know what they're doing is to look at their credibility or their credentials, for lack of a better word, their credentials and how those credentials align with the type of award grant winner that they seem to be looking for. So if someone says, look, we are looking to give this money to a high-performing student, you need to portray yourself as a high-performing student when it comes to your profile, so that you are someone that they see to be the right person for what they intended. And if you are the right person, then they would have an expectation that you understand what it is that you would be doing. So the proposal then should demonstrate your clarity and understanding of the need in your community. So what we're saying is that your proposal should not just be a statement of all the things that you would do, of all the things that you think are problematic in theoretical terms, but it should also be a representation of your understanding of the field-based expectations. So it's no use someone writing about a problem as if they understand it from afar, but you need to be someone who looks like you understand this as a person who is operating in the field that is being studied. So that is the next tip. Then after that, one of the other things that is a common requirement that often gets misrepresented or underrepresented when people apply for budgets and grants is that normally the proposal narrative and the budget requests don't align. So one of the tips is that you should ensure that the narrative of your proposal and the things that you detail as being priorities of your research journey are the same things that you budget for. So typically what happens sometimes is that you get individuals who will have very clear narratives that say, hi, this proposal will focus on this. I will collect a literature review. I will have a literature review. I will have 20 participants. I will do this. And then suddenly when they do the budget, they are asking for money to support 200 participants. So there's a need to make sure that your story that you have in the narrative is indeed the exact same story that you budget for when you present your budget. And the best way to do this, and what I do, and this is a tip that I've gained from repeated involvement with applications, is that, when you write a narrative, you write the narrative of the literature review, you write your aim, your objectives, and how you'll go about collecting data. At the very end of the entire process of writing a proposal, you can go back and read the proposal and underline in red all the activities that you think are cost bearing. So everything that you think bears a cost. If you've written about the potential of carrying out interviews and you know that to do that, you need money, you will underline that in red. And as you read through your entire proposal, you will everything that has a cost potential will be underlined in red. So in essence, what you're now saying is that when you create a budget, all those items need to be reflected in the budget. So you find that the budget that's been well aligned with the proposal narrative is very detailed. It speaks about everything in the expected detail. And that is one of the ways of ensuring that your budget and your proposal narrative speak to each other. And of course, the other thing that they say is that many submitting entities always submit their proposals, their budgets, as if they're an afterthought. And the easiest way to tell this is all of you know that whenever you write an assignment or you write a project, when it comes to writing the conclusion, the last 2 or 3 pages, we're usually tired and we just want to close it. Because the budget is done last, people tend to have that kind of attitude towards budget development. But ironically, when reviewers of grant look at your work, they tend to have much more interest in the budget and much more interest in what the problem is, and everything that falls in between they're not so interested in. So the less beautifully crafted budget, the less likely you are to convince potential grant giving entities that you are a serious contender for the grant that they have. Then the other tip they refer to is that remember the people who fund your work are people, or the individuals who fund or review grants are people. So they are subject to all the whims, preferences, manipulations that human beings can be subjected to. Take, for example, the issue of first impressions. So you submit a piece of work, and when you submit it, the fonts are out of shape, the fonts are not aligned, the grammatical error all over. They've asked for a 15-page document, yours is 35 pages. All those things are talking to human beings. Those human beings take first impressions and use them to make judgments about who you are. They take other peripheral things to make judgments about how reliable you are. So if you make sure that all communications and contacts with the funding entities and those who are watching the grant are done in a way that best represents who you are, then you are making sure that you are leaving them with the impression that you would be a worthy candidate. Now, you will know that every grant opportunity tends to have the name of a person or a grant manager or a project manager. And many times they have contact details to say if you need additional information, this is who you find. And sometimes, if you know that you are someone who makes a really great impression by just introducing you to people, there's no harm in you writing to the project manager and saying, hey, I'm currently working on this and this proposal for submission to you. Can you please confirm this, that? And then you get a sense, they get a sense and communicate with you. And for the first time, you become a real person. So when you submit, the likelihood that they found is that the likelihood of your submission being taken out and given special treatment, whether they put it on top, make sure it's not forgotten, increases if you're previously known. Now, there are some key things, key concepts that I should just share with you, and I'm doing these for the purposes entirely for the purpose of just ensuring readiness in your understanding of the language that grant givers, funders use. So when they talk about grant announcements, all it is really is just a notice inviting potential applicants. So there are some grants that come through announcement, some that are always static and always there. The typical ones that come by announcement is, the NRF, the National Research Foundation, have a grant in particular that they call the Tutuga grant, which students at your level tend to apply for. That has a communication cycle, and they communicate with everyone once in a while to say, hey, we are in the second cycle, we're giving out this amount of money in the second cycle, and so forth and so forth. But that's a typical example of a grant that comes via announcement. The ones that don't come via announcement are the ones that you see on static sites, websites, that are there just to hold grant details and so forth. And this is where we come to some of them. Now, folks, you will notice many of these are based in the USA, the UK, and of course, Australia has also become quite good at this. But www.grants.gov is, in my opinion, the all-inclusive one. It has all sorts of opportunities, anything from you getting grant money to collect data, do data collection, you requesting grant money so that you can take unpaid leave from work for you to study. All those options are there. And I encourage you to just go and have a look and see what's on offer. The others that are there are great too, but grants.gov stands out for a number of reasons. Now, the other term that they use, and you will come across, is this term that is called funding priorities. And funding priorities are a very specific term in that in as much as entities or potential funding bodies have descriptions of who they are and what they're interested in, or the scope of the work that they do, they may actually have a very specific area of work that they want to fund for the next coming year. And they would announce that, as a funding priority. So in essence, take for example, if you wanted to seek funding from a particular foundation, and the foundation was interested in giving money for startups, business startups. But in that year, they will say, look, we've had a lot of problems with COVID, and we are changing our priorities to be things that are much more aligned with COVID. So then that priority does not necessarily have to be the same area of interest as the body that are advertising it, but it is what's referred to as a funding priority, and it's often declared by the funding body. So you get a sense of knowing that, oh, this is what they're most interested in. Then, of course, there is this term that is utilized, and this term is selection criteria. So every well-written grant opportunity will tell you, it will say, look, this is the opportunity, this is what is available, but everyone who performs well or who submits work will be judged using a number of criteria, and this is the criteria that we use. Now, not all funding bodies have the same criteria, but they tend to have the same things, similar things that they're interested in. The next few slides cover some of those types of things, and I will just speak to them so you get a sense. of what it is that funding bodies are interested in. So firstly, the quality of project design. How you have developed your project, the logic of it, the way that you set up, the way the problem emerges, how you plan for it, how you collect data in relation to it, all those things relate to the design of your project. And normally that's allocated 30 to 50% of all the marks when people are deciding whether or not to award you. So the stronger you are in that place, the higher the percentage that you will get in relation to that component. Areas such as the quality of project evaluation, the need for the project and significance are all spoken to on this slide. But just the quality of project evaluation is something that I should just speak to. So when funding bodies give you money, the last thing they want to have to do is to be compelled to continuously assess how you're using the money, check up on your adherence to your rules. They don't want to do that. They don't want to have to do that because most of the times the business that your project is interested in is not their business of interest. So they really want a self-running person that they can give money to, and that person would evaluate themselves, give them reports of how they're doing. And that provision that you make for the evaluation of your work is an important thing. So they want to know, do you have a system? Are you going to propose a way to evaluate your project as you deliver it? And the better the quality of that, the higher the score that they give. So anything from 10% to 40% of the scoring sheet looks at that. The need for the project speaks to you how well you've identified that the issue that you're looking at is significant, it's important, it affects a lot of people, and it needs urgent attention. That then speaks to the need for the project. And anything from 10 to 25% of allocated selection marks are given to that particular criteria. The next criteria that's looked at is significance, which relates to how well you as the person who wrote the proposal can demonstrate that your topic is seriously important and that if unattended to, the world would suffer, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And that can attract anything from 15 to 25%. Now, in addition to those things, the quality of your management plan, the quality of the services that the project will rely on or utilize, all those things are counted to get a sense of whether or not you represent a good place for them to give money to you. Then they want to know whether the people that you're saying will do the work that they should do are indeed of the right quality, are they of the right expertise? And then, of course, if you have said you've applied for money, but you've indicated that certain resources are required, if your application makes sense to those resources, then there is an alignment between what you're asking for and what you would be reasonably able to deliver if you were given what you asked for. And that speaks to adequacy of resources. So those things are the type of things that they ask for. What is interesting and quite notable now is that every grant application will give you an indication of what it is that they look at when they are marking if your work is good or not. And so some grant opportunities will indicate the criteria that they're interested in using a pie chart. The pie chart will now give you an idea of what it is that they're focusing more on and are going to award the most marks on. So this particular application package had a page that said, look, our biggest thing that we're interested in is this project design space, followed by whether the resources, there's a match between that and what you are saying you want to do. Then, of course, they're interested in your ability to evaluate your progress in the plan that you put together to manage the project so it works well. And of course, the need that you can show as being an indication that your topic is indeed needed. That is one format. There's another format, which I won't get into, but you realize that this package or application has separated out the prioritization of important criteria differently. So suddenly, the project design is the biggest thing here, followed by need and so forth and so forth. But those are just examples of what it is that gets looked at. Now, folks, as I said, the first half of the session that was presented yesterday looked a lot at content expectations. The second half looks at process. And with process, a lot of it is literally just telling you what to do, giving you tips, things like, given that proposals and grants are seriously important things, there's guidance that you should be spending no less than 25 hours on a particular grant application, because that is essentially the most minimum amount of attention one could give and be still able to say, I actually did all the important things in this process. There's an expectation also that the application packs for grants usually come as 50 or 60 page things with countless number of attachments, and the expectation is that you read every single one of them, even if it takes you a good amount of the 25 to 48 hours, 40 hours that's spoken about. You make sure you read that. And the reason you do that is compliance is everything. So when you read the pack, there will be things they want you to complete. They want you to complete your bio. They want you to make a declaration about previous this, previous that. And unless you read the entire package, you will not have that. If you have questions about something, rather than guess your way around it, you get in touch with the project or competition manager for the call that you are applying into and ask them to guide you on specific things that you're unsure about. Now, these things about how you organize yourself. The ones that are in front of you are fairly straightforward, and I will just let them sit up there for a second or two so you can see and make reference to them, but there's nothing in there that's particularly difficult. So, adherence to formatting guidelines, structuring the narrative according to the criteria that you know will be used, paying a careful attention to technical and language issues, justifying your everything that you do in relation to your proposal to show that the costs that you eventually end up with are reasonable and necessary. Then you proofread the proposal. There's nothing as bad as having a proposal where the language is not representative of what it is that people want it to be. Do not wait until the last minute to submit. You have all sorts of things. That can happen in the last minute to require people to request more time. And the better thing to do is to literally change the submission deadline in your head so that you're aiming for a time that's closer than what the actual deadline is. There are issues around different timelines between time zones, between those who call you, the different time zones between those that call you to offer you the grant opportunity and where you might be. So there are people who apply in for grant opportunities in Singapore, for example. And Singapore is a few hours ahead of South Africa. So if they say the deadline for something is 4 p.m. Singapore time, there's every likelihood that in South African time, it's actually 12 noon. You need to pay attention to all those things, the submission requirements, and so forth. Then ensuring that you really work through the entire package for the application to make sure the necessary signatures are there and all that stuff. So this, once again, refers to common mistakes, which I think I've referred and alluded to in the first session and again in this session. People generally think they can do shortcuts and submit things without giving the time that's required. People will look at the application and say, I see 40 attachments, I'll pick the one or two that attract me. Bad move. Then, of course, there are formatting guidelines that come with every submission. So they will say to you, look, this particular proposal call will only accept proposals that are written in this font, and they use these types of diagram formats. If you don't follow that, you will have a desktop rejection, where your submission arrives at the application space and it is rejected immediately because it didn't follow some basic technical guidelines. So you want to fix that. There are people who don't obtain required signatures. And what we mean by that is, folks, many a time you will see a grant opportunity that says, we are an opportunity that's available to XYZ, but we only give it to students of universities. So when you submit, there may be a section that says, hey, there may be a section that says, hey, you need to have this signed off by the university you're in as proof of the fact that they support your application. So what the tendency that unfortunately happens is that individuals run so much against time that they start to look for signatures a day or two before the submission deadline. And I can assure you that if you are a student at UNISA, you probably need to give it about a week. So if you apply for any grant, and that grant indicates to you that you need to submit confirmation that your university will support you, then they're actually saying that get your paperwork and your proposal ready at least a week before. Because when it's ready, only when it's ready, will you be able to approach UNISA to actually request these required signatures. So then the final big mistake that you see is that people fail to proofread their work. So they just submit things, and once you give an impression that you are very poorly prepared in terms of just the technical requirements, they think, well, if you can't manage your writing, how on earth will you manage our money? Yeah, I think this slide here I'll leave. I put in here just to kind of share some of the questions that people would ordinarily ask a project manager, but they're sort of the questions that you yourself need to know as an applicant. Issues around the deadline date, issues about whether you are an eligible applicant, whether the signing of the required forms is something that's within your scope, knowing whether the submission of the proposal means submission of everything under the proposal, or is there a way of sending some of the package beforehand and some after the deadline, where you need to know where you go if you have additional questions. You also want to know whether this grant will be offered in a year's time. So if you feel you're not ready, you can better prepare yourself for the next round. Understanding whether the deadline that's given to you is not a moving deadline, and so forth. Now, we'll come back to this a little bit later. I'd set up some questions, an opportunity for people to ask questions. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about something. Virtually all students in South Africa particularly will at some point be made aware of National Research Foundation grant opportunity. And if you go to the NRF and you look there are many things for students. And I think what I wanted to show you is that the template that they follow has elements, but all these elements are things you are now aware of given the content and overview that I shared with you a little bit earlier on. So firstly, they will ask you, the first section is project information. So it will ask you, in essence, it's kind of you giving an overview of what the project you want to submit for consideration for this grant is. What is the project? What are you focusing on? What are you trying to do within the project? Then the details of research section is literally the section where they ask you to give an overview of the potential impact. What is the anticipated significance of this work that you are applying for money for? What is the problem that is behind what it is that you're searching for? So the problem statement. What is the rationale and what is the literature review behind this? So what is it that you have looked at to support the need for this work that you are asking us to give you money for? What is the literature? What are the debates? What are the contested issues that relate to this area that you've chosen to focus on? Then the same place that they say details of research asks you to give aims and objectives, which we have spoken about. And I've explained the need for them to be clear, the need for them to be aligned, the golden thread issue that we spoke about yesterday. They want to know, get a sense of the methodology and your proposed plan for researching things. Then, of course, there is an expectation within NRF grants in particular. They have a section that they call transformation. And that section really is a communication of the NRF's priority, a communication of South African priority, and the South African priority and much the NRF priority is that you need to demonstrate that the study you're doing has the potential or has the ability to offer transformational opportunity. So transformation in terms of ensuring that previously overlooked groups are somehow given a chance to learn from your work. Or sometimes actually the transformation part may be that in your proposed data collection strategy, you've identified that you will use the people who live in community X as your data collectors, and you will train those people. So when you leave that community, you have transformed the place by training many of their people to be data collectors and so forth and so forth. Then, of course, the details of the research. It's a quick space where you indicate what it is that you expect to produce as a result of this grant that you've applied for. Many of you might be applying for grants to do with supporting you to study. So your anticipated output might be the completion of a degree. For some, it might be the completion of a publication and so forth. Then there's a section that asks you to comment on how aligned your work is to national imperatives. And literally that is just picking up some of the guiding documents that we look at. Like people will say, you know, the national plan, is one, there's the national plan is one such imperative. So you would look at that. Some people would look at the sustainable development goals and say, hey, let's see what these goals that we refer to, how my project aligns to these wider things. And then finally in your story, and not finally, out of these topic areas, there's an anticipation that you would offer information and description of how you plan to manage the resulting data and how you'll make use of it once you get it, all the issues about protection of data and so forth. Now, these parts that I've shown here are the central body of the application to the NRF. In and around all these things, there's another set of things that people generally are asked to do. So they're asked to provide attachments, which may be their qualifications. They need to show ethical clearance, evidence that they've sought ethical clearance for this project that they want to be funded. They must give detail of a preferred panel. So remember, sometimes grant applications are so high in number that certain entities do not have the ability to review everything. So what they do is they ask you as an applicant to refer people that they can check the credibility of, and they use those groups, if you've appropriately chosen people, as the panel that will review your work. Then of course you need to give, as per one of the other additional attachments usually is all your budgeting requirements, your operational costs, and so forth. Then the next part that is contained in this is information about the financials. If you have an element of your study that's going to support students who are maybe helping with your work, then of course there are additional things, and these other things that get looked at are things to do with you telling us who you're participating, the rest of your team are, giving us references if you're someone who's done previous projects and you want to give evidence of the fact that when you start you finish things and all those things, and those are all the details that would be contained in references. Hey, so you would have a reference to say, hey, so and so was once given a grant before and this is how they treated it and I recommend them for future allocations. You have to include your CV. Then of course there are all the other issues that have to do with details, providing details of your qualifications, what you've done in your career so far, and sometimes if this work you're doing is work that gets applied for by qualified teachers, they are asked to indicate what their record of supervising students is, because that gives a sense of whether they are interested in capacity development or not. Now here's some other things, that sections that this NRF grant opportunity has. They ask for a personality profile. They ask for absence from research information. So that if, say, you have a CV and in it there's 3 years that you can't account for, you would explain them in the absence from research story. They need declarations around your disability and so forth. And then, of course, they want to see your background in terms of your publications, from books you've done, chapters, all these things. And all of that is really to give them a sense of who the person is outside of the application. For many of you as students, you probably wouldn't engage in this. Then, of course, now we get to the point where I can engage and entertain questions from you about the job of grant writing. And now I offer this opportunity for questions, and I offer it as a prelude to one-to-one consultations. So if there's any one of you as participants who have students of this course who have identified and set up applications for grants. We invite you, and we invite you without reservation to submit to us the call that you responded to and the grant that you're trying to secure, and we would assist you at a one-to-one level with how you prepare your submission for that call. So these questions that we'll have now are questions that look at or at least try to address some things that are generic, but when you get to a point where you have to consider very personalized subject-specific issues, you can literally refer yourself to us so that we walk you through the grant process. The reason we do that, folks, with grants is very few people apply for them, but they make such huge seminal changes for people, and sometimes the difference between whether an individual is able to complete their studies or not. Right. Now, folks, we are in a position where we can now consider, right, I will take that off. We are now in a position where we can consider the live event questions and answers that I presented. So I'm just putting those up. Folks, the journey with grant applications is you only get better at doing this the more you do it. And what I say to people is that you need to apply to some entry-level grant opportunities ahead of time so you get a sense of what writing grant is, so that when the absolute grant that you want arrives, you're not using that as a training ground. I'm struggling a little bit to get the live Q&A coming up. For some reason, it's not showing up, and I hope I'm going to ask that if our producers can open up their end of the live Q&A and send me snapshots of it, that would be really, really helpful. It's not coming up at all here on my show it, hide, show it. Okay, it's not coming up at all. So students, for some reason, we've been having a little bit of a trouble with Microsoft Teams, and it becomes like this usually when they update things, and there are a number of things that they've updated over the last week. So we struggle with that. But I notice now that the Q&A is opening, right? It's opening, right? I've got the questions here. Please, I went to the website you gave us. None of the grants matches what I'm currently doing. Folks, there's someone who says that, but I'm not sure whether they really went to grants fully. Grant is over 45,000 grants. So I don't know how in one night you could have exhausted what you're looking at. And some of the grant opportunities just specifically say we are supporting students. The detail of what they want from the students emanates when you go to their specific sites. So I don't know, but remember, I've now shared with you many other links. I gave you grants.gov yesterday, but today on this presentation, I shared more links. I've also said to you, you can actually literally go onto the website, onto the internet, and put in grants, support grants for so-and-so. You will get calls everywhere. Are there possibilities that one can secure a grant for the current PhD research at UNISA? The possibilities are there. You can secure a grant, but you don't secure the grant from UNISA. You go out into the world and you look for people who are sponsoring PhD studies in your areas and so forth, and you apply. It generally is a little bit odd to ask for support when you've already started your study, but it happens often, and some people get broke in the process. So there are formats to support you to do this, but the opportunity is yes. I have given you some grant opportunity places, but the internet and vague and self-driven searching will do a great amount for you. And I've already mentioned the National Research Foundation as one starting point, and I suggest that you go there too, just to have a look. Do grant providing organizations have their own typical format for proposal submission? And this is from Hairu. Yes, Hairu, yesterday I was specific that I will give you a standardized proposal template, but in actual fact, with every grant, you must go to the very specific people who are offering the grant and see if they offer a structure. And more times than not, they offer the structure because they want you all to have similar proposals so that they can do a head-to-head comparison of them. Can grant applications be submitted to any potential funder, or should they be submitted to specific funders that are preferred by UNISA? Right, folks, anyone who funds your work. Now, firstly, the answer is yes, you can approach any potential funder. UNISA does not have preferred funders. We have funders who support all students normally, and those as the National Research Foundation is one such. And then how does this affect the ownership of the research result? The intellectual property, overall intellectual property of your work belongs to the university. So anyone who offers you a grant needs to understand that you are a student of UNISA and you're doing this as part of a formal course of study. And once you say that, it becomes implicit. It's implicitly stated in your work that actually it's explicitly stated in your work that you are a student of UNISA and are by that purpose a person whose whose intellectual property has already been claimed. But with universities, they are very negotiating. So, after 2 publications or 2 projects, people are allowed to carry out other things related to their work, which may not be the property of UNISA per se. And remember also, folks, when you write an application to a grant entity, there are 2 ways of applying. Some people just apply for their own fees. And then some people apply for support towards the completion of a grant. Those 2 things are different and have different implications for you in terms of the ownership of the intellectual property. As a UNISA student, when is the ideal time to apply for a grant? Look, remember, it isn't UNISA who govern what grants appear. It is the people who offer the grants. So the idea is that you should apply all the time. Many people want to apply 3 or 4 months before their supposed registration time. So they give the funders an opportunity to consider their application, to make decisions, to give money before the fees are due. Are there opportunities for grants in UNISA? Folks, the only opportunities that exist at UNISA are the internal bursaries that the university offers, but that if you go to the College of Graduate Studies website and look for student finances, we give study bursaries. Those have already, for 2021, they've happened. 2022 call will come out in November, and it's they have money, but it can't support everybody. It's not normally enough to carry out everything. They 80% of the grants are awarded to indigenous South African students. the other 20 are awarded to students from outside of South Africa. So it depends on where you are. Your chances differ quite a bit. It is advisable to apply for more than one grant. Is it advisable to apply for more than one grant of the same project? While one would be trying to cover one's back, being granted 2 grants may be overwhelming. Folks, when you apply for different grants, you write different proposals. If you have one idea and you're willing to write about it differently for 2 entities and submit it, that's wonderful. And of course, you can apply, and when you're offered 2 grants, you don't have to accept 2 grants. And in fact, it's incumbent on you to tell one grant provider that you've applied for another and so forth. But if you're offered a grant, then you choose one and not both, because or you alert them both of the joint offer, so you are never at any point working on a grant without the knowledge of others. Is the NRF only for research projects implemented in South Africa? For the most part, yes, it is, but they will have calls that say, look, we support projects that are assisting the whole of Africa. So it's not a given, but the majority of their project support is for South African space. Can someone from Ghana apply for NRF grants? Some of the calls allow for that. Some of the calls speak more about what institution you study at rather than where you are from. So if they allow UNISA students, by definition, you are a UNISA student regardless of where you are studenting from. If one were to apply for a grant to collect and analyze data, then complete the study report, what are the examples of essentials one would cite? For example, look, all these guidelines about editors, proofreaders, transcribers, and so on are things that you can include. But remember, when you apply for a call, it will specifically say the things that they do not allow. They will say maybe they only allow 25% of the budget to be expended on paying individuals, or they will say certain things to you. So all those questions can be answered by looking at that, or the whole 90 pages that I said usually come with the pack. And that's where people who don't read the entire pack miss things. Tokens of appreciation are not a supported format within research. We don't do appreciation tokens for all sorts of reasons to do with them changing the responses people give you and so forth. What the type of terminology people use now is compensation. So if you have participants that have paid 10 Rand, $10 to get to your study, then you are allowed to compensate them accordingly. Definitely, age is a problem. Look, I'm not sure. Many of the grants have their restrictions, hey? But grants.gov does not always have age-related restrictions. Some of the grants that you see are for novice applicants, young applicants, and so forth. So then the issue of age plays up, but that does not mean that there is no opportunity for people of a different age. It just means you have to look outside the comfort zone. Right, folks, these are the questions that I have in front of me. I've attended to them. The other questions that are there are relating really to issues around administrative stuff, and they've all been attended to. There's someone who thought I was muted at one point, but I'm not. So I'm not sure how that happened for them. But or there might have been a break in the transition from the presentation to the video. Right, folks, so this is it in as far as grant writing is concerned. You need to really focus on giving this a go, applying for smaller grants to begin with. Don't ask for a huge grant and be the first grant applicant. Sometimes grant applications allow you to be in a team. You put in the face of your supervisor, ask them to guide you, so you've got credibility behind you. Apply for as many grants as you come across, because you only get better at that skill from doing it more and more. On that note, I want to thank you for joining us this evening, and also just want to reassure you that you will be getting a program of upcoming sessions. We ideally will be doing one session a week and complementing that with offers of other things that you can submit. We will also be eliciting from you some of the subject areas that you want us to look at, and maybe what people can do. And you can do this even though I've signed off. After I sign off, you are able to continue to type out specific topics within the research space that you want us to consider for future sessions. And if you start doing that now, I will collate that information as a preliminary pieces of information that I have, and we'll get more and more of it, then design a package of blast sessions that actually go and deal with one topic and deal with it well. I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening, and I can say good night now. Take care.